Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolutely wild, century-long history of American broadcasting. We're going to see exactly how this entire landscape was built, shaped, and ultimately completely transformed. It's a fascinating journey, really, going from the super chaotic early days of radio right up to the fiercely competitive era of cable and satellites. We've got to start with this highly provocative claim by former FCC chairman Mark Fowler. He famously described television as simply a toaster with pictures. I mean, wow, right? That basically summed up this incredibly powerful philosophy, that broadcasting should just be treated like any other household utility or profit-making appliance, completely free from any government interference in its programming. But, it begs a massive question about this medium we literally consume every single day. So, how exactly did American broadcasting become so aggressively commercial? To figure out how a truly revolutionary communication technology devolves into, well, a simple household appliance designed to sell you things, we have to go back to the very beginning. We need to look right at the foundational DNA of American media. Section 1. The birth of American radio. Long before TV screens lit up our living rooms, the American broadcasting system was entirely forged in the sheer chaos of the early radio airwaves. It's wild to think about, but radio went from just a handful of experimental point-to-point transmissions to an absolute national phenomenon practically overnight. In just 3 short years, from 1920 to 1923, the U.S. jumped from virtually 0 to 556 stations on the air. It was a total technological gold rush. Manufacturers like RCA were suddenly pumping radios into living rooms across the entire country. But there was a catch. How in the world do you pay for the programming once that initial novelty wears off? Well, to fund this rapidly growing medium, AT&T introduced a revolutionary idea in 1922 called toll broadcasting. Now, surprisingly enough, many early pioneers originally thought advertising on the radio was, frankly, unseemly. But AT&T completely changed the game. They aired a 10 to 15-minute commercial for an apartment building in Jackson Heights, New York. Can you imagine sitting through a 15-minute real estate ad today? No way. But just like that, they permanently embedded sponsored programming into American media. So, the really crucial takeaway here is that these initial, chaotic years laid down the core rules of the game. It was a very delicate, often contradictory balance. You had these private, commercially funded corporations, and they were just handed pieces of the electromagnetic spectrum, which, legally speaking, was considered public property. They were allowed to operate these local stations for profit, just as long as they met this vague, largely undefined mandate to serve the public interest, convenience, or necessity. This era also birthed an absolute clash of titans. Because producing programming was incredibly expensive for local stations, national networks stepped in to provide economies of scale. It started with the colossal NBC network, which was backed by massive industrial giants, and they were battling the upstart CBS, which was actually bought by a cigar manufacturer named William S. Paley. Both of them were just racing to capture these massive national audiences, to attract all those lucrative advertising dollars. Section 2. The television transformation. Right after World War II, a brand new technological marvel arrived on the scene. But rather than reinventing the wheel, television just adopted the existing radio infrastructure. And the diffusion of TV? Absolutely staggering. By 1960, television had skyrocketed into 87% of all American homes. The early TV industry was completely dominated by the exact same people and companies who had already mastered radio. So television basically inherited radio's regulatory principles, its commercialized market structure, and its major networks, swiftly dethroning radio as the nation's prime mass entertainer. Because television was so incredibly expensive to produce, and it relied so heavily on national advertisers, its massive scale demanded safe, advertiser-friendly mass entertainment. Between 1963 and 1985, situation comedies made up a whopping 33% of the primetime schedule, consistently holding that #1 popularity rank. And meanwhile, vital news and public affairs, just 3%. They sat dead last in the ratings. It was quite literally a system designed to deliver audiences to advertisers, not to challenge them. Now, contrary to what you might actually expect, radio didn't die out during the TV boom. Instead, it ingeniously pivoted. By utilizing brand's new, highly portable transistor technology, radio shifted away from national network dramas and moved toward highly localized, format-specialized stations. Think all news or top 40 music. It transformed into this essential complement to television, rather than trying to be a direct competitor. Section 3. The Cable and Satellite Era. So, for nearly 30 years, the big three television networks, NBC, CBS, and ABC, ran an absolutely undisputed oligopoly. But the late 1970s ushered in a really chaotic era of disintegration. The revolutionary combination of satellite transmission and cable distribution completely shattered that old network dominance. What was once a closed system of just 3 or 4 channels literally exploded. By 1990, cable access pushed well past 50% of American households, and it brought a massive tidal wave of specialized viewing options right along with it. This created an entirely new business model. Specialized cable channels like CNN succeeded because they were, as owner Ted Turner noted, lean and mean. Because they were fueled partially by subscriber fees rather than exclusively by advertising, they could thrive on just a tiny fraction of the audience. I mean, a 0.5% rating would absolutely doom a traditional broadcast show in 5 minutes, but on cable, it was a totally sustainable business.
And, the disruption wasn't just happening on cable. The shifting political landscape of the time heavily favored deregulation. When the FCC relaxed its multiple station ownership rules, media moguls like Rupert Murdoch jumped right in. In 1986, Murdoch bought up a bunch of independent stations and launched the Fox broadcasting system, successfully creating the very first new over-the-air network since 1943. A real game changer.
This relentless onslaught of competition severely crippled the traditional networks. It dragged their primetime audience share down from a monopolistic 91% in the late 70s to just 64% in barely a decade. The golden days of soaring profits without any real competition, those were officially over. With profits plummeting, we started seeing hostile corporate takeovers and some truly brutal budget cuts across the big three networks, particularly in their news divisions. Hundreds of employees were fired. This sparked deep, existential conflicts over the very soul of broadcasting. As CBS anchor Dan Rather lamented at the time, there was this real tension over whether network television was still a public trust or if it was merely a business venture strictly serving the bottom line. Section 4. The Toaster with Pictures. And that brings our narrative full circle. Ultimately, the shape of American broadcasting wasn't just driven by technology. It was driven by the immense power of the American consumer economy. The whole system relies on capturing millions of viewers instantly just to sell consumer goods. That intense economic pressure naturally pushes the medium to avoid controversy, right? It favors easily palatable entertainment over hard-hitting reality. And it creates this constant political push for a laissez-faire approach, basically arguing that media should just be treated exactly like any other private enterprise. As our media landscape continues to fracture into endless streaming platforms and social feeds today, the historical lessons of radio and television remain incredibly relevant for us. We really have to ask ourselves, if the airwaves, or our digital pipelines, are just a toaster with pictures, merely appliances used to deliver ads, what happens to the vital ideas, the challenging information, and the shared reality that a democratic society actually needs to survive? It's definitely something to think about the next time you turn on your screen.